The perfect prime lens is the one that keeps you from using your favorite zoom lens instead. Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today I am talking about what, in my opinion, and in lots of other opinions as well, is the most usable everyday prime lens focal length, and to me, that's the 35mm. And the irony is, the reason I rented and used it in the first place is because my 24-70 out of nowhere just stopped working. I was on a trip with friends in Chicago a few years ago and it just stopped extending past 35mm. Maybe that was a sign, but in the moment it was a pain because my wedding and mini moon were coming up and the timeline to get it repaired would make it unavailable for those events. So, for our wedding weekend and trips to Lake Tahoe and Palm Springs, I rented Sony's 35mm G Master f1.4 and it changed everything for me. In fact, I fell so hard for that lens back in 2021 that I ended up buying it a few months later. And now here I am a few years later, making not one, but two videos centered around its prime focal length. Today, we'll talk about what makes it so ideal, why you should look at the 35 as your 24-70 alternative, my first takeaways back in 2021, and what I've learned since. Then in the next video, I'll do some comparisons to several other popular prime focal lengths and why the 35 more times than not is the best option if you just had to choose one. I figure it's better to isolate these topics so I can dive a little bit deeper into them rather than hit you with a video that's like 20 minutes of me just rambling on and maybe not making as much sense. But for now, let's get into it. What made me fall in love with this 35mm lens, which, by the way, is the equivalent to the popular 23mm lens on an APS-C system? Well, first, it's a focal length that's really simple to use in all the right ways. If you're coming from a standard zoom lens like a 24-70, you'll find that this sits on the wider end of that range, which makes it easy to pick up and start shooting with from the start. These photos are from the first time I played around with it, just getting shots of friends and family during our rehearsal brunch on wedding weekend. 35mm is wide enough to make composing a decent shot pretty easy, and with a bright aperture like f1.4, you're getting some pretty nice background separation as well. Some of these photos that I'm in, obviously I didn't take myself. I just handed the camera off to people who never even used a camera like this, which was the A7S III, and said, do your best. And they came out pretty well if you ask me. And again, that's a testament to where it sits in that 24-70 range that we're so used to already. By definition, it's a standard focal length. If you're trying to isolate your subject from a close to medium range, you won't have any trouble doing so like you might with something considered wide or ultra wide like a 24 or 20 or something in the teens. But it's also not as tight as something like a 50mm lens. Now, numerically, 35 and 50 don't seem like they're too far apart, but in terms of focal length, it is a significant difference. Say you're sitting at the table having a meal with someone. The image on the left is taken at 35mm. On the right, it's the same distance with an APS-C crop applied, so about 52mm. And as you'd imagine, if you're trying to take a photo of something on the table or even closer, it gets even more difficult to compose your shot. Let's apply this to travel or everyday shooting. It is a great lens to walk around with and take pictures of friends and family and do what is considered street photography, I guess. I'm not standing a long distance from anyone or really having to pose anyone. Therefore, I'm able to get some candid shots without drawing a lot of attention to myself and taking away from the moment. Diving a little deeper into the term simple to use, versatility also plays a role. There's a short list of focal lengths that make it easy to tell the whole story with just one lens. This series of photos is one of my favorite examples of what the 35 can do though. By stepping back a little bit, I'm easily able to go wide enough to set the scene of two medical professionals having a conversation in a courtyard. But stepping in, I'm able to take a few photos that isolate them separately. And by the way, these were all taken at f1.4, which on this lens strikes the perfect balance of showing the environment and giving your subject that extra pop it needs to stand out. That's a topic I'll dive deeper into when we do comparisons in the next video. On the other end of the spectrum, let's say you're doing more street style photography where you're not isolating one subject, but instead want a wide angle of the entire scene. That's where this lens beats the 50, in my opinion. Sure, if you're able to step back far enough, any standard lens can capture a wide view, but with the 35, it's a lot easier when you're limited on space while still keeping out the distortion that you get with something wider. Again, comparisons coming in the future alongside the highly regarded 20mm prime. These are some of my favorite shots from our trip to Europe a few years ago, all taken with the 35mm GM on the A7 IV. I had no problem capturing entire buildings, street corners, cafes, scenes like that, while also being able to snap a shot of the details in the same sitting. And that's what makes this focal length such a joy to shoot on. Unless you need something on the telephoto end, there's almost no compromise. You can see why Fuji's X100 series has done so well with this focal length in their fixed lens. Now, before we wrap up, I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't mention video as well. From a form factor standpoint, the 35mm prime should be rather compact. Sony's GM and its f1.8 version are both small enough to comfortably run on a lot of modern gimbals, and it's become my gimbal lens of choice for weddings. The walking down the aisle shots, dance floor shots, those in particular are where it thrives for me. It's also what I use to shoot most of my YouTube videos and A-rolls, and if nothing else, it's just a great lens to give your film some beautiful bokeh when you can get really tight on your subject while also being able to fly well in a gimbal and handle some wide shots when filming and taking a step back. All that said, this is just my opinion, and I'm well aware of the war out there that rages on between the 35 and 50 being the best standard prime focal lengths. I do love the 50 for interviews, but it's still not quite overall as versatile to me. And ultimately, the biggest tell for what your favorite lens is what you use the most. And personally, I can't scroll more than a few seconds in my camera roll or in Lightroom without seeing a series of frames taken with the old faithful 35mm GM. I do want to know what you think about this though. Is the 35 the champion of prime lenses? What is your personal go-to? Thanks as always for humoring my photo and video gear takes. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for more of what I'm working on featuring this focal length, and I'll see you in the next video.